Welcome to another edition of Cults and the Culting of America podcast. My name is Scot Loyd, along with knitting cult lady Daniella Mestyanek Young. Daniella, good to see you.
Good to see you. I'm glad I'm in a vehicle that's not moving or in a house that's not moving.
Yeah.
And you have become an author since the last time we spoke.
I have the book, The God I Was Given, is out there and it's available on Amazon in both the paperback and the Kindle edition, and hopefully, fingers crossed, the Audible condition. That's what I'm feeling, right? Is a condition. The Audible audio edition is coming soon, so look for that as well. But thank you, Daniella, for all of the encouragement. It's been quite the ride, and yeah, I'm excited about all the opportunities coming my way because of the book.
Yeah, of course. I can't wait to hear the audiobook. I presume you recorded it.
Absolutely.
Very
Yes.
good. Very good.
I don't know that it'll be quite the award-winning Daniella Mestyanek Young, but it'll be close.
Oh, I'm strapping in for the next audiobook recording, and I'm not looking forward to it.
That is a chore, isn't it? It really was. It was like 3 days, 8 hours just reading out loud.
Yeah, it's hard. It is hard work. Well, speaking of hard things, we have a very interesting guest today.
Absolutely. Elizabeth is joining us. Elizabeth, we'll take a moment and let you introduce yourself to our audience. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth Abbey, and this is my husband, Dr. Daniella Abbey. We are married, obviously, and I went through the troubled teen industry and took part in Paris Hilton's This is Paris documentary about our experiences through that. And ironically, I married a psychiatrist after all that kind of stuff, which is, in retrospect, really ironic. But that kind of led me on my path to be going to law school and ending up working in that field specifically as it relates to children's victim advocacy and children victim rights. And my husband is a psychiatrist. He works he's at the VA primarily, at North Chicago VA, level federal healthcare center, something to that effect. He is the chair or co-chair of the ethics committee there, and he has a private practice on the side.
Wonderful. Well, it's good to have you, Elizabeth. And I know this is something that Daniella talks about quite a bit. We've discussed on this podcast and others, the fact that in so many of these groups, right, children are the ones that are on the receiving end of so much of the harm that is inflicted. And really, you would think that people would have more concern for children, but yet in so many of these groups, children are the first to be harmed and the most often harmed.
I mean, yes. I don't know exactly what there's a response required there. It's just an agree thing because
Yeah.
Kids bear the brunt of it. They're also kind of the thermostat for like what's going on. Like if kids are going to be a lot more likely to give a lot more authentic response because they're not necessarily as able to mask and hide what's really going on as well as anybody else, as adults typically can be. So kids also then carry that forward, and can do a variety of things with what they've endured and what they've survived. Sometimes they can pull it together and get themselves out, and sometimes the harm perpetuates, whether it be inflicted on themselves or on other people. So it kind of varies.
Yeah, there are cult scholars. I'm trying to remember exactly who it was. I think it's Dr. Alexandra Stein who says that we buy into the indoctrination process in cults. Like we agree to that. And I'm sure your husband probably understands this. My experience is not buying into the cult as a child. Like I was just like, this doesn't make any sense. But when I chose to go into the army, I was buying into that. So I would be the one much less likely to put up any, qualms about anything that seemed weird. And it's one of those things where I think that children in cults, when that's all we will still like children don't necessarily buy themselves past illogical things. Children will stop and be like, but why? And cults cannot handle that. And so it tends to become pretty ruthless with dealing with children. And I think one of the things that a lot of these cults ultimately realize is that they have to break the teenagers. They have to break the teenagers, and they have to get that buy-in once the children are old enough to be able to rationalize themselves into that. And that's, of course, where the troubled teen industry comes in.
Any thoughts?
Oh yeah, I think especially speaking to what you were, just to piggyback off of what you were saying, I think there's a lot of positive and negative reinforcement used to control, especially the older children and teenagers. And when those reinforcements don't work, that's when the children or teenagers have graduated to the troubled teen industry, where it's a lot more negative reinforcement, let's just say, than positive.
Yeah, my experience kind of coming face to face with the troubled teen industry was I listened to this book called Jesus Land. And it is about, I believe, this camp that Mike Pence has part ownership of in the Dominican Republic. And this was before I was writing my book. And I remember this weird experience of being like, I'm relating to this from both sides of my life. Like, I'm relating to this from being a child in a cult and being treated in these especially harsh ways. But then I'm also relating to it from my military experience. And to be clear, I think the troubled teen industry is far less humane than general military training. But it was such a mind-opening thing for me that really, I think, influenced the way I wrote my book and brought me to believing that these troubled teen camps really are cult experiences, and that what you went through, Elizabeth, was extraordinarily horrific. And I don't know how either of you feel about that being placed in the realm of cult experience. I'd be interested.
Well, I feel like so each iteration of the troubled teen industry is kind of its own little subsection, so to speak. There are within that larger umbrella, there are like the CEDU schools, and then there's the WASPSS academies that are part of it, and then there are other iterations within that same umbrella. Where I went to Provo Canyon, which was with Paris, and within that group, it's in Utah, so it's an interesting place to begin with. And then there are a lot of girls there who were from, objectively speaking, cult upbringings, where they could be part of Mormon fundamental groups that they've reached their adolescence, and they're like, yeah, I don't think this is gonna work. Thank you so much. I'm gonna be over here now. And then there are other girls who, like from me, because I was an elite gymnast, and like all elite gymnasts did, I got an eating disorder. So that's like, how I kind of ended up there. And elite gymnastics could be its own, iteration of cultish too, because you kind of fall within this, your mind control, what you're going to do is what you're going to do, and you can ignore everything else. So, I think there's like kind of an onion in that sense, is like, yes, the troubled teen industry in one sense is its own cult part. Then there is, because that requires a certain amount of buy-in to make it through the program. I got very lucky in that I was 17 when I went, and I literally in my journal had like a ticking time to like, all right, I only have to deal with you guys for 360 more days, and that's the longest it can possibly be. Which was great because I had that backdrop. But if you were 15 or 13, where some girls were, you didn't necessarily have that, okay, I only have to do this for X number more time. So they were a lot more likely to get a lot more, buy-in, and sit there and be like, all right, so I'm going to conform to what they say I have to do to be able to do this. So where, I didn't have that same pathway that they did. So, um, I feel like there is a lot that kind of comes through, and like a variety of like layers within that cultish subset.
Elizabeth, for the benefit of our listeners, why don't you take us through your experiences, how you ended up where you were at, and what revelations perhaps you've had now on the other side of it.
Sure. We just pulled in this. I'm gonna mute you guys so I can run in the house really quick. So I'm not sitting in the car. Give me 2 seconds. I'm not gonna disconnect. I'm just gonna mute.
Okay.
I really think that like what she said about waiting the 360 days. I mean, I've never heard of anyone doing this except deployed soldiers and prisoners who are literally, ticking days off. And I mean, a year is an exceptionally long time. And it beggars belief that these teenagers are sent to these things for multiple years. It's just so heartbreaking.
So my husband's gonna come back out in a second because we just got back home. So I left January 13th of 1999. I went from my house in Illinois to Provo or Orem, Utah. And I had the very stereotypical where you hear about it, where people come into your room and they wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning and they're like, you're gonna go the easy way or the hard way. And I was essentially, kidnapped from my bedroom at 3:30 in the morning on January 13th, where two strangers I had never met before came into my bedroom, and I had no knowledge they were coming in. I had no knowledge that this was going to happen at all. The night before, I was working on a AP Physics midterm that was due on the 15th of January. And at 3:30 in the morning, they knocked on my door and they're like, you're going to go. And obviously I wasn't expecting it, to say the least. And I got dressed. I wore a pair of dark blue jeans, a pink camisole with a satin edging, a black wool cardigan with little rosettes on the buttons. I brought my violin, my teddy bear, and my favorite book. And got on the plane and got on the plane at O'Hare and got off in Salt Lake City and was met by three people. And drove to Orem. And that's where I was until September 28th of 1999. I, again, had it very easy comparatively to other people who were in there with me. I only had a year that I could be there, whereas a lot of girls who were there with me were there for several years. I think the longest girl that I know of that was there for 4.5 years. It was not my best couple of months by a long shot. It took me a really long time to, number one, even talk about it, because the first time I talked about it was ironically when Paris called me, and she was filming this memoir thing, and she was like, "Hey, are you free?" And I was like, "What do you want from me now? I haven't talked to you in a while. What do you need?" And she's like, "So you remember this?" I'm like, "Yeah, actively try to forget, but thanks." And so I discussed it with Ziduk, because we were dating at the time.
Yeah.
And I was like, "So, what do you think?" And you were like, "You should do it." I was not anxious to do it at all. But I was also actively trying to not admit to myself what had happened. So going through and like revisiting all of that, and then like, oh God, that really was not at all okay. Became kind of like this part of therapy that I actively tried to not do. So it was, a really interesting, Now you get to deal with it.
Yeah, this part of not wanting to deal with your traumatic past. I wonder what Danak has to say about this, but like for me, like that was what I did, right? I got thrown out of the cult when I was 15 years old from what I think, like we know now, based on the book I wrote, was an incredibly traumatic childhood. But it wasn't like I didn't think of my childhood as traumatic. It was I did everything I could to not think about it at all. I was just someone that just appeared here. And if I had to answer any questions, they were as short as possible. And I was fine. And I was so busy being fine for 10 years until I broke. And I think it's not talked about enough because we don't know how to talk about it. How you can put these traumatic experiences behind you. Veterans do it too, right? We go through these horribly traumatic things and then we just say, no, we're fine. We're fine. We're fine. And then at some point, stuff catches up with us and we're very much not fine.
I mean, it's kind of within the definition of PTSD, right?
Yeah.
Like actively thinking about those memories, those thoughts is terrifying. So it's understandable that people actively try to not think about it. Because if you think about it, you kind of end up reliving it, maybe having flashbacks. And it's like you can hear it, you can smell it, you can feel it. All those events that you're trying really hard not to think about. It you can see how it lends itself to substance abuse because people try to escape from those thoughts, those memories. Can really see why people can't sleep because memories come back as dreams and nightmares, and so people try to escape and they try to use whatever they can get their hands on to maybe try and sleep, shove it off, not think about it, try and go about my life in the now. I want to keep the past in the past, and also like why. Well, for one thing, substances are can be rampant in this population, and how it kind of starts off with, I just need to get some sleep, and that's kind of the gateway drug, so to speak, something to help me sleep, and it kind of evolves from there. Um, and I think that's just like a normal human response to not experience pain, to not experience fear, especially like this degree of pain and fear. Even if you weren't experiencing like a physical trauma, just emotional. I mean, after a certain degree, emotional becomes physical, and so it all affects everyone so deeply. And
Elizabeth, I'm curious if, again, nothing justifies obviously what you experienced, but the way that you described it, you're in your room, you're doing homework, right? A responsible.
It's 2 in the morning, but like I had finished. I was like our formal living room when I was a kid. Like I had my AP physics stuff spread out all over the floor because that's
Right.
how I should work. And then I went to bed because that's what you did, right?
Yeah, and so I'm wondering, did anyone ever explain to you why this was happening, or why they felt justified to send you to this camp?
Well, I mean, I was anorexic and I was actively starving to death at the time. I am now 4'11". At the time, I was maybe 4'8", but I was 46 pounds, so really thin.
But that sounds like something that a medical doctor should be helping you with, and not a
yeah,
troubled teen camp. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Realistically, yeah. But like, in retrospect, my parents did pretty much everything wrong that you should have done. But they were also working at it from them not wanting to have the abuse cycles that they were perpetuating be brought to light either. So they were as much protecting themselves at the same time as like We can't have our kids starve to death here. So nothing that they did was right. By any stretch. And I've recently, within the past couple of years, I started asking my mom, like, hey, I just wanted her to acknowledge what happened. I just wanted her to acknowledge the fact that this should not have happened. And her reaction was, it's been 26 years, get over it. So it's like, so yeah, that's why we're not close. We probably won't ever be close, because it's like, I'm not asking for much here, just asking for an acknowledgement. And it's one of those things where she can't be the kind of parent that should have kids. She can't, I don't think she knows how to do that. I don't think she knows how to be vulnerable with anybody or be emotionally honest with anybody. But, from my parents' perspective, I was starving myself to death. But there were a lot better ways to go about it than what they did.
Yeah.
Like, everything they did was wrong. Everything. But, and one of the things that ticks me off that my mom will sit there and say is like, well, this made you so much stronger. It's like, yeah, but no. I didn't need to be strong. I needed to be safe. And you couldn't do that. And not only could you not do that, you sent me halfway across the country to pay people to torture me further. And because I could sit there and count and sit there and be like, great, the longest I have to do this for is 360 more days. It's the absolute longest. Then I got myself through it. She didn't. The people she was paying to do this didn't get me through it. I got myself through it. Because when we got out there, the doctor looked at me and said that I was going to die. And I said, literally, can I swear? I said, "F you, then make me." Um, and I got myself sick, I got myself unsick. And that is how I got out of it. It wasn't because of anything the therapist did, because hell, the therapist, who is a PhD therapist, he still has his PhD. I disclosed to him the sexual abuse that I was having happen. And instead of him doing the mandatory reporting thing, he said, maybe this is this person's way of showing love. And I remember being 17 and being like, well, that's stupid. I'm not going to listen to anything you have to say. I'm going to go back and do my English homework.
And
So,
I mean, this is part of my whole problem with the concept of the troubled teen, right? Is that it's like what high control parents assuage themselves with, to be like, well, my teenager is causing this problem, right? Objectively problematic. She's starving to death. But then they just stop there and they don't, go further into, oh, maybe it's because she's being sexually abused and she's not safe. And, so I like to say, like, there's no such thing as troubled teens. There's, teenagers who have all kinds of problems, and always, every single time, that means they need more support, not what you were given, which is just so heartbreaking.
It's a convenient way to hide it, and very cursory symptom management, so we can say we did something.
I mean, most of the girls that were there were drugged beyond belief. Like, most of the girls that were there were horrifically medicated. And now, discussing with you, a couple of them discuss it with you, like the med regimens they were on, and they're like, that is not safe.
Yeah, insane doses, and people that aren't trained to administer these doses or these medications, administering them. All kinds of unethical practice of restraints, physical and chemical. Just physical coercion. Like, none of this. Like, if someone's in acute distress and they're a danger to themselves or others, yes, you can either chemically or physically restrain them, but it's done in what's supposed to be done in a very ethical and a very deliberate manner. So you're minimizing as much as possible the amount of time that they are under restraints, and at least in Illinois, you're supposed to check, every hour, every 15 minutes.
Oh, we had a timer. Like,
Yeah.
if you talked back, you'd be restrained at minimum for 45 minutes,
Mhm.
at minimum for an hour and a half. And you weren't restrained in a clean way. You were stripped naked by some other 20-year-old guy who was getting off on this and who would just sit there and watch you freeze and be naked.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be anything like that. I mean, that's just punitive, it's just coercion all around, and just the and when you are administering these medications, it's supposed to be the formulaic, right? Like X number of milligrams for X number of pounds, that sort of thing. And it sounds like these very young girls of like very small stature were getting horrendous doses, and such that a lot of them develop lifelong side effects from these medications, and these side effects are debilitating. I mean, not just disfiguring; it just will impact your entire life.
Yeah, product excuses.
Yeah,
Elizabeth,
and
yeah, and I think we can all acknowledge, man, I'm so sorry that you had to endure all of that. But it strikes me, right, that these particular places, if they're branded and their whole um, marketing is built around the idea of helping quote unquote troubled teens. When the teens arrive there, it is in their best interest, i.e., to get paid, if the teen indeed turns out to be troubled, right? And nobody's going to show up and say, oh, your parents made a mistake. You're not supposed to be here. Here's a full refund. So anytime money gets involved, right, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that they have to prove, they have to demonstrate and justify their existence and their treatment plan. And unfortunately, children are receiving the brunt of the harm.
Yes and no. And so a lot of these places recently, yeah, we have worked on getting legislation passed, in a state by state endeavor to some kids were sent there by their school districts because they were autism spectrum disorder or ADHD or whatever, and they were having a harder time in regular classrooms. There were also kids who were there who were sent there by the justice system. There was a girl that I had and my roommate who was there for allegedly killing her mother. So there, yes and no, there would be some ostensibly treatment plan, so to speak, but a lot of the treatment plan wasn't so much treatment as it was fulfilling somebody's IEP or fulfilling somebody's incarceration time. So the people who were there for three different groups of people who were there. There were kids who were sent by DCFS or their state's iteration thereof. There were kids whose parents could pay for it out of pocket, and there were kids who were sent by the school district or by the justice system. There was not really a whole lot of anything beyond that. And that said, if you're taking a bunch of kids who are coming from a school system and they have an IEP or autism or ADHD or something, they would receive, in theory, medications for that. Most of the time they did not receive your classical stimulants or anything like that. Most of the time they were just sedated, from my recollection at least. And most of the girls who were there from justice situations were, again, just sedated. Um, Most of the girls who were there from DCFS and other abuse situations were also sedated. Um, there's a theme. And and it kind of sucks that the solution was to just drug the kids until they would meet their incarceration date, they would graduate the schooling, or their parents would stop paying for them.
And so, as you reflect back on your experiences,
Yeah.
what advice would you give to parents who find themselves with a teenager and they're having difficulty and they do need help? What avenues are available to parents to help their teenager? Obviously, we don't want to go the route, the horrible and traumatic experiences that you had to endure. What advice would you give to parents, give to teenagers who are facing very real difficulties in their lives?
It kind of depend on like what the situation is, right? If you have a kid who is having something that looks like conduct disorder, my advice would be very different than from somebody who looks like they're having an eating disorder, because they're not going to be treated the same way. They shouldn't be approached the same way. But my main thinking that I would say is for parents to really look at themselves and look at their family system, because a lot of issues are going to be coming from the family system. It's going to be from which everything springs. So that would be where I would start, is look at your family system and really be honest about it. Because again, from my perspective and looking back, most of the parents were not honest about what their situations were, and the kids are the ones paying the price. If your kid has something where they're acting out and there are legal issues, I have two contrasting bits of advice. If the kid is going to end up in somewhere like juvenile hall or something, juvenile delinquency, at least there they have due process rights. Whereas if you're at a place like this, you do not have due process rights. There is no appeals, there is no nothing. You have nothing to fall back on. So at least if you're in something that resembles some kind of legal system, you have due process rights, and that is a benefit to you. So use them. With respect to treatment as a whole, I would really implore parents to not send their kid halfway across the country, because you can't have eyes on them. You can't know what's happening. And so many of these systems and something or whatever would sit there and say, these kids are going to lie to you. They're saying they're being abused. We're not abusing them. You believe us, not your kid. Your kid is troubled. We're telling you the truth. Your kid is the problem. Don't believe your kids. So the kids are set up to fail, and they're set up and isolated halfway across the country with no fallback, with nothing they can do about it. And there's no way for them to get adequate medical attention. There is no way for them to get evidence-based treatment. There is no way for them to reach out to their parents without supervision, without anybody monitoring their calls, without anybody monitoring their letters. And even if they were able to get in touch with their family, who's to say their family would believe them or be a safe person for them to reach out to? Because very likely your family of origin is not exactly a healthy situation. So, my thinking on that would be avoid sending them halfway across the country, if possible. Make sure that the facility has a way that parents and children can talk without the facility monitoring it. Make sure that, or as much as you can, make sure they're following evidence-based practices and not just, stating everybody to, make them calmer. And look at what kind of diagnoses they take, because an eating disorder facility probably has no business taking somebody with conduct disorder, probably has no business taking somebody with all these other things. It should be really targeted to the situation at hand.
Yeah, and also there's a facility report to the state, because as you said earlier, like a lot of this is a symptom. They're manifesting something.
Yeah.
And if, for example, let's just say eating disorders and it's stemming from forward history of sexual abuse, If you're not going to do anything with the sexual abuse and now say, oh, the eating disorder is under control, and just send them back to the home environment where the abuse is happening, right? It's kind of pointless. You're kind of doing more harm to the kid because now the goal, these people will leave me, but now they're sending me back. Like, why did I tell them
Yeah.
all these things? And
It's not safe for the kid.
Yeah.
Because then it gets worse.
Exactly.
And I also think too, like for parents that are truly struggling with challenging children and teenagers, right? If you can't even figure out how to help your child, is sending them away to somebody else who doesn't even know them that likely to be the answer? There's this thing they say in entrepreneurship where they're like, don't hire someone to do sales and marketing for your business if you haven't figured out how to do it. And this kind of strikes me as like, it's this easy, they're selling you this easy solution, which is your kid has a problem, you ship them off here, we're going to fix it. And if like you are a parent that truly is involved and the problem isn't coming from your family system, I think you as the parent need to be involved in that solution every step of the way. It's not going to be ship your kid off to this facility somewhere.
There is like one of the most evidence-based ways of approaching this that we have right now is called wraparound care. And it really involves the kid's community, family, medical system, education system, and it kind of essentially cocoons the kid within people who know them and care about them, which has had a lot more success than shipping the kid across the country. And heck, a lot of parents were sending the kids even further abroad, like Mexico or Jamaica, to get away from the limited legal oversight we had here. Like we talked about briefly, a couple of the bills that we had passed were that in Oregon specifically, that you can't send a kid as part of their
The treatment plan.
a treatment plan, whether it be from the Department of Education or from the legal system across state lines, as a function of protecting the kid. Because a lot of these places were benefiting from it and having kids die in care, not infrequently. And there we have a whole list of numbers of kids who've died at these different treatment facilities, and how it happens.
And also a lot of provable, horrific sexual abuse too.
Well, yeah.
Horrible.
Yeah.
I mean, and just to be very clear, the thing where they strip you while they're restraining you, like that is sexual abuse across the board. Like,
Heck, you had to shower in front of people, and it wasn't showering in front of somebody who was your same gender. It was showering in front of, literally, there were like 18, 19-year-old BYU students, and you're like, showering in front of them. And because again, there were two big groups of kids who were at these places. There were kids who were super behind in education, and there were kids where I was who was just like, we can't teach you because we only have special ed services. So here, go to BYU. So I would be going to class with a lot of the group living staff that were responsible for watching me when I get back, and I would end up doing their homework because that way they would leave me alone. So it's one of those like, this isn't
so rife
reasonable.
for abuse. It's so rife for abuse.
And all of this was so subjective, and there was no way that you could reach out to anybody to get any kind of oversight or any kind of help. You were cut off from the world, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Total
Elizabeth,
isolation.
in addition to the wraparound treatment, immersive treatment that you mentioned, are there other resources that you could point our listeners to if that come to mind? Obviously, your experience is something that no one needs to experience. But are there
Still
other?
happening.
Say that again, please.
It's still happening frequently.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, unfortunately.
Thousands of kids every year are sent. And it's a very big business.
lots of money is being made off of the backs of these kids. But in terms of resources, I mean, I would look at wraparound care. I would look at intensive outpatient and partial hospital, because I'd be much more likely to, assuming the family situation is not the source of the issue. Like, that caveat being said, I'd be really, really hard pressed to send a kid outside of the home unless there is an issue where there's a danger to self, danger to others, and in that circumstance, they're limiting it to the minimum amount away as possible. Because feeling safe, feeling secure, and knowing that people will be there to help you, who you can trust, is going to be the biggest amount of help that you can get for kids. And I feel like not being able to trust people to help you is something that will follow kids a lot longer in their life than almost anything else, because that sets them up to be in abusive relationships and not be able to tell anybody. It sets them up to be taken advantage of professionally. It sets them up for a lot more negative outcomes than a lot of other things that would be more top of mind. So for me, I would be much more likely to look for partial hospital, intensive outpatient, working with dialectical behavioral therapy, and not exclusively just for borderline, but even for a lot broader applications, working with a family therapist to really make sure everybody's communicating well and on the same page, because what the parents may be experiencing may not be what the kid is experiencing, and making sure that everybody is seeing the same thing.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think IOPs and PHPs, partial hospitalization programs, are underutilized. And it's very hard to find a good DBT counselor because there just aren't that many. It's a field that needs to be expanded on, but it's a very challenging field, so not too many people go into it. But I have a lot of patients that have gone through a good DBT course, and they all have benefited. Um, and yeah, like, I think those are all very good recommendations.
I think early treatment for PTSD, even if it isn't something that an adult might consider super traumatic, kids are going to have a very different interpretation of what's traumatic and what's not traumatic. Um, so whether it be moving and changing schools, that can be a trigger for PTSD for kids. Having a very low threshold to engage in therapy, having a very low threshold to engage in EMDR or other post-traumatic stress things would be other things that I would look at.
And like, we have done this. We put our 5-year-old in play therapy after a big move where she felt a lot of loss and was just struggling to get over it. And we were starting to, like, not even behavior problems, but we were just starting to see some things that we thought were concerning. And we didn't necessarily know how to help her deal with this sense of loss. And I think just holding space for that, right? What you said is so important, that kids find things completely different. You know, the things that kids find traumatic and that adults might not find traumatic are completely different. And being able to, really hold space for this fact that, like, the children did not ask to be here in this life, and like, we talk about a lot about cults and high control religion, but one of the things I know that I, as a parent, try to always keep in mind is, like, she did not ask to be born or be a prisoner in this home for 18 years. And so it's on us to try to, like, work with that, and kind of keep that in front of mind. The adults in the home, in theory, get to choose to be there, but not so for the kids.
I think that was like something that, like, because I had a previous marriage, because my second husband, he was a sweetheart. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. He really is. He really are. But like, that was a really, really hard thing for my kids to go through, the divorce that we had and the marriage. and then to be expected to be like, oh, hi, we're a happy family now. I mean, that's great for me, right? But it's not easy for them. So, I think one thing like all parents can do, whether or not their kid is experiencing issues, is really communicate strongly with your kids that you believe them, that you absolutely believe them, that you are on their side, um, and that you'll always protect them and defend them. Um, and opening that dialogue that you're always going to be on their side no matter what. Um, and that you believe them when they're telling you things goes a long way towards making kids feel safe. Um, and that feeling safe and feeling heard goes a long way towards the kid not feeling isolated alone, the kid feeling like they can come to you with the little stuff or the big stuff. I mean, that's those are tertiary
Yeah.
things, but I think they're important nonetheless, especially when you're having littler kids who will not be littler for that long.
Yeah. And, they've done this study in corporate America where employees do not get upset when their thing that they wanted doesn't get chosen, right? Like if you ask a bunch of employees for input, they don't get upset if their thing doesn't get chosen as long as they feel like they were listened to. Employees get upset when they don't feel listened to. And that, is something that really sticks with me. And this thing that you said about being on their team. One of the things I think that is kind of a generic cult baby experience is feeling sacrificed for the mission. Feeling that the adults in your life are not on your team all the time. There will be some things that they will put above that. And, that as someone who's gone through this kind of trauma, what you're saying really resonates with me as a parent. Like what I want my child to know is I will always be on her team. When something bad happens to her, I want the first thought to be, let me call mom and dad for help, not, oh, how can I keep mom and dad from finding out?
And I think that's kind of how I look at it with my kids, is like, I don't want my kids to be afraid to tell me if they got in trouble or something. I would much prefer them to loop me in early and often, and then it's easy for me to deal with it ahead of time, as opposed to them trying to hide something from me. And we've encountered that with the kids like now, is like they tell me everything, and you're kind of like, it's a lot. But
Yeah, it's an interesting experience.
but it's different from how you grew up.
Yeah.
You came from Sri Lanka, and you have a different parenting experience, and I don't. I mean, hell, I'm 43. I have 5 kids. I never actively discussed the fact that I had my period with my mom. So as far as she's concerned, that has never happened. Whereas with my kids, it's something that like I knew immediately. We had, discussions beforehand. They knew all of this was going to happen. They knew their body parts. They knew what was going to happen. It was not a surprise. For you and your family, it was like, nope, never discussed it. And
No.
for my family, like as far as my mom knows, it's never actually happened. So, I much prefer having that kind of openness with my kids, because then when something does happen that they genuinely need me for, that line of communication is there. It's not something you have to try and figure out.
It's
And,
amazing the benefits of communication, right?
I was going to say, this is what gives me hope for I think millennials are actually doing a pretty phenomenal job at stopping the generational trauma with us and trying to turn around and do so much better than we were given. And thank you for sharing that about your kids. I feel like this was a heavy story to hold, and knowing that this kind of stuff still happens to thousands of kids every year. Thanks for talking about it and doing this documentary, coming on our show, all of the things that you've done, but also thanks for being a better parent to your 5 kids.
Oh, I've screwed up plenty. I have have screwed up plenty and then some.
As
I
have we all.
apologize all the time, you know.
And just that right there, that's such a
Yeah.
big difference, right? I think between any of us that grew up in high control land, did we get apologized to by adults?
Yeah.
No. That
Did you
is
say that my mom apologized to you?
No. That's not something that happens.
when,
No.
you know,
Like would laugh at me, like, you want me to say what?
and honestly, like the thing that I think is the most heartening to me as a parent is like, we don't have that many rules, but when we do, and our child flings the rules back in our faces, I love that, right? I love that she feels comfortable enough, you know, so hey, we have a rule that if you're using the family space, whoever's using it first gets to dominate the sound. Someone else can't come in and be louder. Obviously, in the beginning, that was mostly us telling her to shush. But now, as a 10-year-old, she'll be like, hey, I had it. You know, you got to go out there. And we do. We hold ourselves to the same rules that we want to enforce in her, you know. And I think that, like, just this understanding that children are little humans the whole time. If they're troubled, we need to find out why and not just ship them off.
Like it's funny you say that because like at one point we don't do rules and punishments in our house very much. Like there isn't a need to. We really, you know, it's much more, you know, pick up after yourself. Don't, you know, leave everything everywhere. You know, be a human. Um, but when my kids were littler, my now 17-year-old, I told her like no TV right now. So she went and she got her Kindle Fire. And I said, "What did I say?" And she said, "You said no TV. Technically, no TV. You are not using the TV." As she pointed out to me. So it's like, great. I pay attention during contracts now to make sure that, like, she's like, all right, cool. But, you know, it was great that she felt comfortable and confident enough to be like, no, that's not what you said. And then I'd be like, you know what? You're right. You won this one. Good for you.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story, the courage to do that, and we really appreciate it. And thank you so much to both of you for speaking to this subject, very heavy subject, with such expertise, because that was your experience, and thankfully you are out of that now. And thank you again for everything. Is there anything you'd like to add or share that we didn't have an opportunity to talk about?
Anything, Steve?
No, that's it for me. I think you were very eloquent about it.
Oh, God, I was a mess.
I think you did a good job.
You did a great job. Very good job.
I think everybody needs to know that they're supported, and
Right.
whether that is like from your family of origin or from wherever, there is support out there.
Thank you so much. And Danook, based on this one conversation, I also wanted to say I'm glad to know that there are folks like you in the VA where I get my psychological support and medical care from. So, like, thank you. It's a hard job. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
He's a good guy.
Absolutely. And thank you all. Thank you all for tuning in to this edition of Cults and the Culting of America podcast. And do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, like the episode as well as the podcast, and share it with somebody who can benefit from this information. And until next time, for Daniella Mestyanek Young, knitting cult lady herself, I'm Scot Loyd. We'll see you on the next episode of Cults and the Culting of America.
Bye. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.